In this video, I am half machining the waistband lining into the waistband. This is an alternative method of putting it on that improves or that more securely holds the waistband on the bottom and fastens the curtain in place as well. As I've said, when I make a pair of trousers, I usually use this method along with pressing down the forepart on the waistband inlay rather than what I do in the original trouser construction series, which is linked in the description. You ought to have a firm understanding of making trousers before this video may become useful, and like I said, you'll find the accompanying video series in the description. But if you come back at some point and this video is helpful, please do like. I appreciate it. When you've made your trouser up to the lining stage, so you have the catch-on stuck in and you're ready to apply the curtain, that's when we start deviating. Starting at the side seam, like we usually do, line up the curtain to the waistband's seam allowance. What's different to the original this time is that it's very important that we are not sewing it above the waistline. We need to baste it to the trouser below the seam. We just need the curtain held level. It's very important that the top of the curtain is 1 centimeter or 1 seam allowance above the waistband seam. I'm basting it here, but it's faster to just pin it to the trouser in the important places, where it starts, ends, and pinning in the pleats. Across the center back, with the folded canvas and inlay where the seam allowance of the waistband is covered, we just need to try and keep the tops of the curtain level. Basically the same idea for putting on the front curtains, just fastening them to the trouser below the waist seam. At this stage, before putting on the waistband lining, is when we need to baste the pocket inlay to the side seam. Ideally, you want to finish the baste a little below the waistband seam to make it quite easy to take out in a bit. It's better to have one long piece of waistband, about 6 or 7 centimeters wide, and this time we keep it flat, we don't press it. Starting on the bearer side at just about where the bearer's seam is, line one edge of the waistband lining to the top of the waistband seam allowance, just in the same way we did the curtain. We are applying the lining on top of everything except the bearer's silesia and the fly. Check that you have a few centimeters beyond the front edge of the waistband. Baste it down in much the same way as the curtain on top of the pockets. As is normal, it needs a pleat in the center back, which is as wide as the center back inlay. But be aware that the pleat is currently wrong side up. We want the pleat to open on the center back for no other reason than aesthetics, I guess. Continue to baste the lining down towards the fly. If we had only pinned the curtain in place, it would be basted in place now anyway. Now comes the genius of this method. You fold down the waistband exposing the seam allowance, along with that of the curtain and the lining. Starting from the fly side as close to the center front as possible, back tack through the waistband seam allowance as well as everything that's lined up to it. Machining along the seam as close to the waistband seam as possible for the nicest result. And technically we could sew on the lining without basting it at all. We would have pinned the curtain in place and we'd hold the waistband down as we sew it to the waistband seam allowance. Obviously we can't go over the center back seam since it's covered by the inlay, therefore you just need to get as close as possible and back tack. Starting a new machine stitch on the other side of the center back towards the bearer. Get as close to the bearer's seam as you can, ideally crossing it before backtacking. Given we aren't able to machine over the centre back, we need to backstitch it in place. Best using silk or another strong thread, start about where the machining is back-tacked and try to keep a level stitch towards the other side. Sew through as much as you can without sewing through the entire waistband to the point that it's showing on the other side. There are 2 layers of band roll though, so it's a difficult enough stitch as it is. Remove any basting holding the lining and curtain down. First thing I need to do, since my waistband isn't machined all the way to the bearer, I need to stitch the bottom of the waistband to just past the bearer's seam. The specific method to finish this waistband doesn't involve basting, we can skip straight to the silk. Similarly, beginning in the same place as normal, fasten the thread where we started machining the waistband earlier. Fold the lining up onto the waistband, giving it a seam allowance along the bottom edge towards the center front, trying to make sure that it covers the raw edges. Fell to just below the hook, and it's the same principle as in the original. I'm cutting away some of the excess and folding it back to meet the hook. When you fold it back, you want to fold the lining further than it needs to and pull it into the hook so that it's under tension. Don't fold it too much that it starts creasing, but as much as you can while keeping the result flat and level. Holding the top in place, felling up the hook, a couple of stitches in the middle of the hook, and then towards the top of the waistband. Getting to the top, folding the lining down so that its top edge is sitting a little below the top of the waistband. Make sure there's little to no excess between the top and bottom of the waistband, otherwise it might roll up and peek over the top of the trouser. Just like we did at the hook, at the center back we want to over twist the lining and pull it just to meet the center back seam. We can avoid sewing the pleat closed because it gives the lining a greater amount of give and flexibility. Continuing to sew the lining down across the waistband. Getting to the bearer's silesia, fold that over with the lining and just felling it down. And that is all the unique finishing of sewing this waistband lining on.